All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am Jesse Collings. I'm your host. I am hosting today, of course, Jason Ounpraseuth. Jason, how do you say your last name for the people at home?
Ounpraseuth.
Ounpraseuth. So I'm going to say that wrong about 100 times, but I will get it right eventually. But last week I just said Jason, and I felt bad about that because I just panicked and was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to pronounce Jason's last name, and just scratched it. But I will continue to work on that. But we're back today. Thanks for everyone for tuning in for our second episode. Thanks to everyone who watched episode 1 and gave us some feedback on that. That's obviously really appreciative. Today, we're going to be talking about AEW, looking at kind of 1 year of AEW. Now, granted, AEW has actually almost been around for 2 years since their technical start is early January 2019, but we're a little bit past the year point of weekly Dynamite. I feel like AEW being a weekly constant presence in the wrestling world, and wanted to kind of go through an evaluation of everything that the company has done so far, what our expectations for the company were, the strengths, the weaknesses, and where we see going forward. And again, to talk about like kind of the theme of what we're doing here on this podcast, we're not going to talk about like what just happened on AEW Dynamite unless we're referencing it, for example. We're going to be talking about kind of a macro discussion about the promotion in general. So we're not going to be giving out like hot takes about like exactly what happened last week or what's currently happening from a storyline perspective building up to Full Gear, but rather looking at the promotion in its entirety from its first debut on TNT to what we currently stand today. And so I think where I want to start is looking at before AEW's first show, before Double or Nothing, when all we know about the promotion is what we've seen from, what was teased on Being the Elite, and they had the press conference in Jacksonville and then in Las Vegas. But kind of before we saw any real product from AEW, what our personal expectations for the promotion were as far as what we thought the promotion was going to be. So, Jason, my first question for you is, when you first found out about AEW and you first kind of figured out like, okay, it's the Young Bucks, it's this guy Tony Khan, it's Jericho is probably going to be involved. What were kind of like your expectations for just the general product in the company?
Yeah, so I'd say because this was all done on Being the Elite. It was very rumored that like, hey, the Bucks and Cody, they seem to be the ones spearheading this project. Kenny was kind of just along for the ride, but he was also involved as well. And so I kind of figured that like, okay, this is just like if they do a promotion, it would be like Being the Elite, but then just like a wrestling show along with it. Like they would do their gags and their skits, but then like, hey, here's some really good wrestling along the way. So like New Japan Ring of Honor style type of wrestling. And that's kind of what I expected from it, because that was the big impression that I got, was because the Bucks and Cody, they were very creative, and Cody, he had this big ambitions for what he wanted to do outside of WWE. He had this whole list of people he wanted to face. He did a lot of milestones. Was on Impact, was a Ring of Honor champion as well. And so I figured, this is another outlet for Cody to express himself in his own way. I'm sure we'll get into how that's manifested, but that's my first impressions. I don't know, Jesse, like, were you on those same lines as well, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really know what to expect. I definitely took what we had seen from the group of people involved, which would be like the Young Bucks and Cody, which I had been a pretty loyal watcher to Being the Elite. Mm-hmm. So I had an understanding about like creatively where they were. And also, because they were on the independents and because they were in companies like Ring of Honor and New Japan, they were really allowed to book their own stuff. They came up with their own characters. They came up with a lot of their own storylines. I mean, people have gone on the record saying that when they were in Ring of Honor, they just they were booking themselves in angles and stuff like that. So I knew that they could book themselves. We obviously knew that they were good at marketing themselves. And so just taking that, I kind of thought it would be just kind of like you said, Being the Elite kind of brought to a 2-hour weekly show. And it would contain a lot of the same comedy, but it would also be kind of like I thought like kind of like a pro wrestling guerrilla show, brought to national television, in the sense it was just going to be like this amazing wrestling. They were going to have all this talent. They were going to have a real diverse array of matches. They would have lucha matches, and they'd have Japanese strong style matches, and they'd have comedy matches, and it would function like that. But and I think that to an extent that's true. And one of the reasons I wanted to get into this first is because I do think that the perception of AEW, no matter what you think of it, I think a lot of it comes back to what fans wanted in pro wrestling and what they thought AEW could provide. AEW openly marketed itself as an alternative wrestling product. The slogan they used to market it on TNT was "A New League." The idea was that they were going to provide what wrestling fans thought was missing in mainstream wrestling, or what they were missing on WWE. And that's smart. I mean, that's the correct business model. I think that's definitely what you'd be going for. Is we're not going to do the same thing that people are already seeing. We're going to provide for what you think is missing. But the problem with that is that depending on how old you are as a fan, depending on your preferences as a fan, quote unquote, what's missing in pro wrestling means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And you had people who wanted AEW to be just like WCW, because I miss WCW, and it's going to be on TNT, and Tony Schiavone is going to be on the call, and it's going to be like that. There are people who wanted it to be like the old, NWA or Memphis wrestling, or real old-fashioned territorial wrestling, because that's what was missing. They thought there were people who wanted it to be like the Monday Night Wars, and they wanted it to be like, the Attitude Era, because that's what they thought was missing. There were people who wanted it to just be a super indie promotion. There are people who wanted it to be just like WWE, but just better with, better characters and better wrestling. And AEW has cultivated that. They've said on multiple occasions, we want to be sports-based. We want to be like, we want to be like very sports-based. So some people are like, oh, it's going to be like New Japan in America, where, it's taken very seriously and very traditional, and it's not going to be, sports entertainment-y. And I do think that has created, I don't want to say all of the criticism for AEW kind of goes back to that, but it does feel like a strong amount of of criticism for the product comes back to the idea that AEW said they were going to be this, but they have given me, something opposite of what I wanted. I think we were talking off air a little bit before about the MJF and Chris Jericho skit that just happened. Me and you were both kind of like, hey, it was a 3-minute skit. It was, it was okay. We didn't think it was great, but, we didn't think it was terrible or, offensive. But if you're one of those wrestling fans that really wanted AEW to be, either very serious sports-based wrestling, like New Japan in America, or you want it to be like old school traditional NWA, Memphis wrestling, Mid-South wrestling, you saw something like the musical number and you're like, I can't believe they would do this. When if you step back, it's really just a 3-minute little segment. And so I getting to that, it just seems like I think what people's original expectations for AEW have largely shaped, I think, how they feel about the promotion. And part of that is positive and part of that is negative. But I do think that has had a large impact on the company, especially in its first year, where people are still unsure how they feel about the company.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the case with a lot of pop culture and media. And whenever there's this new TV series or a new movie that isn't based on anything or isn't a remake, people have these expectations for what they wanted it to be. Even look at something like Star Wars, the new trilogy. Wherever you think about it, everyone had their expectations of what they wanted it to be, and they wanted to be back to this old Star Wars, or they wanted something new, or they wanted this or that. And AEW was kind of that same way. Again, like you said, we had no idea what was going to happen with AEW. We had these expectations, but there's a blank slate for what they could do, because there was never a big wrestling company on TNT before. As you said, this is a revival for wrestling on TNT. It could be like Nitro all over again, but we don't know that, because to their credit, the Elite, they've been pretty secretive. They've been very selective of what they want to show fans, and that's a benefit because the surprises have been really good. But it's also a negative because you're setting fans are able to set expectations for themselves. It's not really their fault, but still, fans are expecting high expectations for what they want in wrestling. And like you said, what's missing, quote unquote, is different for a lot of people. Obviously you have JR, that always the Attitude Era is brought up into people's minds because, for a lot of people, nostalgia, the Attitude Era was the best era of wrestling. And so that's what people wanted. But again, they weren't really promising that. They were promised was just an alternative to wrestling, which sounds good. As you said, it's a good business model, but it's also pretty vague as well. Like, what does that mean, an alternative to wrestling? Like, that can mean anything. And so, again, yeah, these expectations were brought up by fans, and it definitely built up a lot of hype. And we saw that initially in the first couple episodes of Dynamite, where like the TV ratings were, I would say, it blew everyone out of the water. Like, I don't think anyone expected Dynamite to do well in the ratings initially, and it just kept growing and growing to the point where they did get their TV deal renewed. And I don't think people expected that either. I think people were expecting, I think, at least for me, I was expecting a very slow burn. I didn't think they would be successful right off the bat. I expected a lot more growing pains initially, and we have seen them, but in very selective moments in very selective areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can get into their business end of it, because I do think that there's a misconception about the company, like its business success or lack of success. I think people look at certain metrics and stuff and have an opinion that they want to put forward and use certain stuff to back that up. But one of the things, someone on Twitter, I'll shout them out, Canucks fan 12345. And I was kind of talking about AEW yesterday on Twitter, and they said this, and said, just, there is nothing on the show that I haven't seen before. Wrestling these days is like a bad rerun. And so I responded, and I think this is a very valid question, which is, as a wrestling fan, and this is a general in pop culture, do you want to see something new for the sake of having never seen it before and it's new? Or do you want to see something that you're familiar with, but done very well? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that. Do you want to see the kind of wrestling that you remembered growing up, but it's really good, and because you enjoy, this style of wrestling, and here's it being done well, and that's what I want to see? Or do you want to be like, I want to see something surprise me. I want to see something incredibly new I've never seen before. And I don't think there's a good or there's a right or wrong way to look at both of those things, because I think it's just a fact that, like, when I listen to music, I want to listen to, there's part of me that wants to listen to music that I'm very familiar with, or a style of music that I'm very familiar with, and listen to that style done very well, because I can appreciate such a good job being done on something I'm familiar with. But I also sometimes want to listen to a completely new genre of music, because maybe I'll discover something, that new sound that I've never heard before, and I'm going to get really into something new. That's also very exciting. And so I think when it comes to AEW, there are people who want to see something new, and they feel like they haven't gotten that yet. But at the same time, I don't know if you're ever going to be able to please all fans, because, like we said, there's a big variety of what people expect, what they want in wrestling, and some of those things really contrast with each other. Some people want, like, very serious sports-based wrestling, and other people want big characters and a lot of skits and segments and stuff like that. And we saw it again going back to the MJF and Jericho musical skit. You could see it in the reaction. Some people were like, I love this. This is so amazing. I'm so I'm so entertained by this. And some people are like, this is crap. I can't believe this is wrestling now, blah, blah, blah. And so you're not going to be able to please everyone. But I do think that it's kind of shaped how people feel about the company based on what they kind of want out of it and how closely AEW is satisfying that specific vein.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like, I guess in a way you can't please everybody, but I feel like AEW kind of, they have something for everybody in a weird way.
Oh, they're trying.
The way, Well, yeah, I mean, just with the creative process at AEW, like with Jericho, with that whole segment, that was an idea of Jericho's and MJF's. Every segment for AEW, like almost every segment, it comes from the performers. Cody, he obviously has his own vision of what he wants for the TNT title. He obviously likes to work with Darby and Brody Lee, and even the Bucks. They have their own vision for Dark Order, which has changed throughout the whole entire year. And so, everyone has their own vision of what they want to do. It's just all kind of put in together, and it kind of makes sense in a weird way where it does feel like a cohesive thing. But if you look at it from segment to segment, it's all very different. Like, that whole segment, the MJF and Jericho thing, like I think we talked about this, a little bit before, when we're recording, like it kind of overshadowed everything else. And I think this has been said, but everyone else has been saying this as well. Like the whole segment kind of overrode the whole entire show. Like there's a tournament for the AEW Championship, and no one's really talking about it. Like Sonny Kiss, he was squashed in like 30 seconds. I don't know how officially how long the match was.
Kenny Omega turned heel on this show.
Yeah, exactly, and no one's talking about it.
Yeah, I mean that, and I think that comes back to like just the general discourse in wrestling now, especially when it comes to communication via social media, which that like people are talking about the reactions to the segments as opposed to talking about the segment itself or talking about like the show itself. We're almost more entertained by the dichotomy of wrestling fandom than we are by the actual product at this point. And we just spent 20 minutes talking about that. So we're definitely victims. We're guilty of that as well. But I do think that that is a reality of it, is that like, you're right. Like there's a lot of stuff that happened on that show. And I do think that objectively, if you watch AEW, I do think they try to satisfy a lot of different groups. If you want to see, like on that show, you start off with Jungle Boy versus Wardlow, which was, in my opinion, a very traditional style pro wrestling match with a lot of obvious psychology. Small, young babyface, big, strong heel. Heel kind of beats up the babyface. Babyface shows a lot of heart, making his comeback, but the big heel's just too much and he wins. And that's like very classic storytelling. You can go back to any wrestling territory and you'll see that kind of match. It's very basic, very simple. But you also have a match like Penta versus Phoenix, and that's a very, I was gonna say traditional lucha libre, but it's certainly not traditional lucha libre. It's very modern lucha libre and high flying, crazy moves, Canadian destroyer finish, all of that kind of stuff that you definitely wouldn't see if you turned on an episode of Mid-South Wrestling from 1984. So you have that kind of thing for a different type of fans. You have, women's wrestling, you have the comedy bits with MJF and Chris Jericho, you have, different stuff. You've got like older names, like Tully Blanchard was prominently featured in the final segment. I mean, there is a lot of stuff going on. I do think that maybe AEW management, and Cody has even come out and said this, that he thinks he felt like in year one he talked too much about what he thought, what the promotion was going to be like, and thought that maybe had been a mistake because he had put expectations on the promotion. But they do try. I mean, there is stuff on there for everybody. I think they're trying to satisfy a lot of fans, but I think that comes back to the idea that wrestling was missing something, but people disagree on what missing actually is, what it's actually missing.
Yeah, I feel like with especially now you have a bunch of former WWE guys on the show, and especially the new ones that come in like Miro, FTR. They've very very outspoken about how much they don't like WWE management. They didn't like how they're treated. And like AEW, they kind of do the bare minimum. Like, they treat people with respect. It's not really new. It's just, they have an open communication. And like, WWE, it's just very different in that way. And, that's just how it is. And, I think that's what AEW's biggest selling point is to a lot of people. Because even for fans, Yeah,
it's a talent-friendly promotion. I would argue that it's probably the most talent-friendly promotion to be on major network television.
Yeah, and then
at least in the modern era, I mean, you can't go back to the territories and you'll find a zillion disputes between talent and management and that kind of thing. And I think there are some hiccups in the sense that that there are some problems with management being prominent talent.
Sure.
It's so different than it used to be. I mean, like one of the main criticisms of AEW, I feel like, has been that the Young Bucks and Cody haven't pushed themselves enough.
Yeah, that's the
very,
odd part.
they've been very unselfish. It's not very old school the
Yeah.
way you would feel like it. It's not Vern Gagne pushing himself as AEW champion when he's in his late 40s. Like it's very different than traditionally sense. But I want to get on one of the things that you said a few minutes ago, Jason, kind of about how what you see on AEW is like the talent comes up with the stuff themselves, like it's their own ideas. And that is how, if you were to ask me, like, what is the defining trait of AEW after 1 year, I would say that it is a company that has empowered talent to fulfill their own creativity. And that's obvious when you look at stuff like the Young Bucks, Cody, Kenny Omega, Jericho. You know that those guys are in charge of their own storylines. But even it goes even beyond that. I mean, I've listened to Darby Allin produce those videos, the black and white videos that you see with Darby Allin. He produces those himself, and he said, I think he said it on Talk Is Jericho, or he might have said it on a Wrestling Observer Radio podcast he was on. But he said that like he films those himself, he edits them himself, he gets someone to do music for it, and he sends them sends them along to AEW, and they show them on TNT. And you're just not going to get that kind of creative control in WWE. You're not going to be able to market yourself like that. And I think that would be like what I would call like the defining trait of AEW, which is that these talent are in charge of their own storylines. And while I think that there are a lot of benefits to that, as far as usually talent has an understanding of how they think they should market themselves, I think there are some negatives to that too. Not everyone is going to be an excellent, mind for marketing themselves. Mm-hmm. And it does help to have management involved in a way. And I'm not saying that they're not. And I'm sure that, Tony Khan makes all the creative decisions in the company. He has the final say. He's in
it's his company.
He's in the Vince McMahon role. But I'm sure they consult with people like Jericho and the executive vice presidents about some of that stuff, but not everyone's going to be great at pitching themselves. I think, it's still early, but I think perhaps the issue with Miro so far is that Miro is marketing himself as like this guy who loves video games and he's friends with Kip Sabian and he wants people on his stream, which is fine, and it might work for him. But I do think back of when he was like originally pushed in WWE, and he was like this unstoppable, machine, badass guy. And I'm thinking that, that was actually probably a better way for him to feel like a star. At least that's in my opinion right now. And so he might have been someone who could benefit, from stronger creative dictation from someone who has a better grasp of how to market him. That's not the case for everyone, obviously. But I do think that's a key component of AEW is that talent has a lot of creative freedom. And so I think what's going to end up happening is you're going to end up seeing a lot of different stuff because talent feels differently about how, what direction they want to go in.
Yeah, definitely. Just going off your point of how it can be a bad side, obviously promos are always best when it comes from, the heart, as we see Eddie Kingston and Ricky Starks, they don't need a script. And, but sometimes they kind of do need a script, not everyone's a good promo.
Yeah.
Obviously it takes reps and, experience, Ricky Starks and Eddie Kingston obviously have tons of experience. That's why they've been good at promos, but obviously some of your talent are very young, like a private party, they might need a script or some sort to get a good promo out of them. Even with some of the women as well, I kind of think of Hikaru Shida. English isn't her first language, and so maybe she struggles with trying to come up with a promo for herself because she's still trying to learn English and trying to get a good cadence out of that. And so maybe she needs some help with promos and stuff like that as well. I don't know. Again, we're not insiders. We don't know what's going on exactly, but those are some things that could come up here and there. But yeah, it's sort of like what you see in the NBA, player empowerment. That's the big thing. It's a big trendy thing, and fans are, for the most part, sort of gravitate towards that, and that's why AEW's become very popular for that, and that's why they market it. Market it in some sort of way, other on podcasts or anything like that. That talent, they get to do what they want more or less. Obviously Tony Khan is the final say because it's his company, but yeah, talent gets to do what they want. Jericho, he's very outspoken about like, hey, I came up with this idea, or I thought about this idea a couple months ago. I wrote this whole Orange Cassidy storyline myself, and so it's I think it adds more to that as well. I think some bad segments, quote unquote. Again, I don't want to go too much into it, but again, the Jericho MJF thing, like I think people kind of like it a bit more because it was Jericho's idea. It was if we found out it was someone else's idea, maybe people wouldn't have liked it so much. I think people kind of like it a bit more because it came from Jericho's mind, and he's talked about, oh, we finished at 2 a.m. We got in 22 minutes before the show started. Like those are admirable sort of traits that you kind of like a little bit. It's an underdog sort of value in that, and that's why AEW sort of marketed themselves as well as an underdog.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I have a personal rule with Chris Jericho where like rules that like apply to other people do not apply to Chris Jericho, because he just has so much charisma that he like. Because the segment is bad. Like I'm not to talk about the segment again, but the segment is technically, I think, like bad. Like the song's they're kind of like not singing correctly. The song's not really that entertaining. Like they're kind of going through it slowly. The dancing is goofy. Like it's bad. But if you're a performer that has so much charisma, and people feel like they understand your character, you can get away with doing a lot of that stuff. I mean, you could say that a lot about like old Rock segments that on paper, if you swapped out the Rock and put in like Randy Orton, like they'd be bad. But Jericho just he has just a really special level of charisma. The rules I don't think apply to him. But shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to talk briefly that AEW has had 2 world champions. They've had Chris Jericho and they've had Jon Moxley. I think that most people would agree that Jericho was the right choice to be the original champion, given his mainstream name value and what he can bring to the company as kind of the heel champion to start the promotion. Moxley has been the second champion. What do you think about those 2 choices so far, and what do you think about their respective title reigns as far as, do you feel like they've been the correct move? Do you think that there were things that they could have done differently with them? What was kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you that objectively Jericho was the best pick. My heart wanted Adam Page because they're doing a good job building him up on BTE and all that. Like he had a very inspirational sort of story. But yeah, I do agree. Objectively, Jericho was the right choice, especially for starting out a company. Everyone knew Chris Jericho was. People don't really know Adam Page very well, and so that was it would have been a very, very risky choice for a very risky decision to start a new company. So I don't think they wanted to double down on those risks. They wanted to minimize those, have Jericho as champion. And I think it's been a very good title run for him that he had with the inner circle, especially help benefiting him, really creating storylines for him as well. The Cody feud, I think, probably one of the best feuds the company's ever had. It was really good, really solid, and I guess kind of going back to like how people wanted the elite to push themselves, it was pretty smart to have Cody sort of put up that stipulation that he would never challenge for the title ever again, and that added a lot of intrigue because I kind of thought Cody was so hot, one of the hottest wrestlers during that period of time, one of the biggest baby faces. So I figured he would win, and AEW, they kind of do a good job of sort of, I guess, surpassing expectations because, I figured Cody, he seemed like the logical choice. Jericho had the belt for already a couple months, and so I thought he would win. He didn't. So Moxley came in and he won the belts. And, unfortunately for Moxley, sort of like the Drew McIntyre thing, most of his title reign has come through the pandemic. And so that's kind of really hurt his title reign. I think a crowd being there would help elevate him as champion. And so right now, I think his title reign's a bit stale, but again, it's kind of unfair to him since most of his title reign has come through the pandemic. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've done a great job with both choices so far. Jericho for the obvious reasons. I think Moxley has been a really good champion, because he has a level of charisma that I don't think anyone else. I don't want to say anyone else in the company has, but he has a special level of charisma, and he has a way to connect with fans in a way that nobody else, I think, in wrestling really has. Something that's really interesting is that if you look at the demographics of AEW, is that AEW has done really well with women, and particularly like teenagers and teenage girls and young women. And that was probably a segment that people were not anticipating that was not a demographic that people were anticipating AEW would be pretty strong in. And I did an article a few months ago about I interviewed a couple of women who were big fans of pro wrestling, and I asked them just kind of some general questions about what their thoughts on wrestling were. And two of the people I talked to, when I asked the question, "What got you into pro wrestling?" they basically said that they got really into Jon Moxley. And this one of the women told me, like, I just was, my friends were kind of watching it, and I saw this guy on TV, and he was like this, hot-headed, kind of like really aggressive guy, but he had these little dimples when he smiled, and he caught my attention. And I think when it's just a bunch of dudes talking about pro wrestling, that we don't have that kind of perspective. And I think Moxley has been big with women. I think he has that kind of character attracts people who might not watch pro wrestling. It's character first, getting eyeballs on the screen, because you see that guy, and it made, this woman who I was talking to, it made her stop and say, "What's this?" And then she got into pro wrestling. And I thought that was a really interesting take that I hadn't heard before. And I think that, he delivers. Like, when has Moxley not delivered as champion? His promos are great. His matches have been very good. I think his feuds have been very strong so far. I think he's done everything possible. I think he's not going to have the title for much longer. I don't expect him to have the title past. I'd be very surprised if he has the title by February. I don't think he's going to lose the title at Eddie Kingston in November. It's possible he loses it on episode of Dynamite. They might do they usually do a big episode like at the start of the year. So it's possible he does it then. But I don't think he's going to have the title. I think personally I think Hangman Page is going to win the title tournament, and then he'll beat Moxley for the championship. But I've really enjoyed both decisions. I think some people thought that Kenny Omega should be the ace of the company, and he should have a year-long title reign, and I think that is probably coming soon. But I think it's really hard for me to look at what Moxley and Jericho have done and say that they could have done better than those guys. And the pandemic, like I said, I think the pandemic has hurt AEW. I don't want to say it's hurt AEW more than WWE, but I do feel like a selling point for AEW was the crowd more than WWE. I don't think that a lot of people watched WWE and were like hyped for I want to see the crowd pop for somebody. And with AEW, because it probably catered towards a more hardcore fan base, there was more likely for these big kind of reactions. And I do think that would dictate how people would feel about certain talents. The Orange Cassidy versus Chris Jericho feud is a completely different feud if it's in front of the crowd. That was a feud that was destined to be in front of a lot of people, because what originally got Orange Cassidy over was that he was just really popular with the live audience. If the crowd didn't react to Orange Cassidy when he would appear here and there in these little bits, then I don't think he would have gotten pushed, and I don't think he would have feuded with Chris Jericho. But he got over. He had that match with Pac. What was that? Was that at Full Gear? Or was that at
Revolution?
Revolution. So that was in February. Yeah, he has that match with Pac, and it's okay, this isn't just an inside guy who a small percentage of our fan base is into. This is a guy who we're really reacting to big time, and I think that changed his career. I think it made him gave him this push, and I think that there are people in AEW right now who could potentially be really over, who are missing out on the crowd reaction. And so in that regards, I do think that has hurt AEW maybe more than WWE. I think it's true that in WWE, we might have a different opinion about Drew McIntyre if he was in front of a live crowd and the crowd was just popping for him big time, or conversely, if he was in front of the crowd and the crowd was chanting for Randy Orton because they found him boring. I don't really know what the reaction would be to Drew McIntyre right now. But I do think in AEW it's hurt these guys. I think it was pointed out this week because he was featured on Dynamite. John Silver, who has become the focal point of Being the Elite and is in 5 segments on every Being the Elite episode and has emerged as this popular kind of cult figure. He's out there on Dynamite, but he's just, kind of a regular guy there. But I have little doubt that if he was in front of the live audience right now and he were to cut like a short promo, 30 or 40% of the crowd that was at that show would be like, oh my God, it's John Silver, and pop for him and laugh at him, like, and think he's a big star. And I think that is an impact. I mean, there's no way to look at the entire wrestling landscape and not say that COVID hasn't impacted, every company.
Yeah, exactly. And, yes, like there hasn't really been a bad moment with Moxley. It's kind of interesting. Brought up the demographics of AEW, women being especially into it. I think people don't really think about it with Japan. Like the big reason New Japan and promotions like Dragon Gate's like probably the second biggest promotion in Japan because a lot of women like Dragon Gate for various reasons, and it's probably similar to what you talked about. Like Kota Ibushi, like obviously he's the guy's
a handsome guy.
Yeah, the guys like him because he's good at wrestling. The women like him because he's very handsome, and so it makes sense, with all of that. And I think that's one of the things that this game we talked about in Japanese wrestling is that hey, these are very handsome guys, and the women also like the storylines as well. AEW has really good characters. John Moxley, he's basically a rogue badass. He's not really part of a faction or a tag team. He teams up with Darby once in a while, Will Hobbs as well, but still he's kind of a lone wolf, and that's pretty cool to see that in front of everyone else. So he's basically a tag team. You have Taz's group, and so obviously the Elite, Inner Circle. John Moxley's kind of on his own, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, when I see Moxley and just like when he cuts his promos, which are like a minute long, and they're just like these kind of basic backstage pre-tapes, it's like, man, this guy's character is so simple. It should be so easy to nail. And he wasn't like a failure in WWE. He was obviously a star and he was pushed and he won the world title. But I do think that like they missed the boat on him. It's not that hard. You just literally had to put a camera in front of him and say, hey, John, like cut like this promo about like how badly you don't want to lose this match. And like he would just, and he cuts it and it works great. It's hard for me to. It's one of those things where I do think that, there are people who WWE misuses, and, there are people who WWE doesn't misuse, and there are people who probably achieve more in WWE than they would in another promotion, but I do think that there are certain people like that. Let me ask you a question kind of related to that. Who out of all of AEW, is there someone out of all of AEW's like ex-WWE signings that you feel like has been like the most disappointing? Because I think it's easy to look at how big of a star John Moxley is. Look how big of a star Chris Jericho is. Look at how big of a star Cody Rhodes is. Are there people so far that you feel have been maybe like, I don't want to say misused necessarily, but you're disappointed in what their current results are in AEW?
I would say Matt Cardona, but I guess he's technically not signed with AEW.
Yeah, he's been kind of MIA, for the last few months. He only made like a couple appearances, right?
But even those couple appearances, they're pretty underwhelming. Like he did a Tiger Driver, like that was the coolest thing he did. But like other than that, like it was just okay. It's Zack Ryder, but he's more jacked and he can do cool moves. But that was really it. But I guess I'll give that a pass since he's technically never signed. He just did a couple dates. But I guess Miro is the obvious choice. He's still very new to the company, but it just seems very aimless for where he's at. But yeah, other than that, like no one really stands out. I don't know. What did you have someone in mind that was?
No, I mean Miro would be probably my pick so far. I think it's still early to write him off. I think that people are maybe disappointed in someone like Ty Dillinger, thinking that there was more there. Sean Spears.
Yeah. But I guess with him, like he seems happy. Like I think that's the big thing for him. He said like he has ambitions for a world title, but he understands his place in the card, and he's just happy where he's at. He can do what he wants. Yeah,
and so one of the things I think this is a weakness for AEW is that I think they are a little too. I think they've been a little too aggressive in just bringing in talent. In the sense that they just have too much talent right now. And I know there's talking about adding the second show. There's talking about bringing in like like having another show and doing something like that. But I do get the sense that they're a little too like happy to bring in fans from like or bring in wrestlers from other shows and other companies. Like we're gonna bring in Cardona for 2 weeks. And it's like, okay, he's gone. Like, what was the point of bringing him in other than just to get a quick pop? And like, we're gonna
Thunder Rosa as well.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I don't have any problem with the women because I think that's a whole different situation as far as just they're so thin, especially with travel restrictions and so much of their talent being abroad that I'm fine with that. But it just seems like they're quick to sign talent that catches their eye, and it's great for the talents. It's good for these guys to get breaks, but it does become like I feel like they don't have enough time to push all these guys. Will Hobbs is an example of a guy who they brought in for a few dates as a freelancer, liked what they saw. It's like, let's sign Will Hobbs, whatever. And everyone's like, great, they signed Will Hobbs, and he gets kind of put in a brief angle. He wrestles Brian Cage on an episode of Dynamite. Okay, and like, okay, Will Hobbs, he's here. And then he's not on the show because they've got a bunch of other people they have to put on. You see it week to week. There, Lance Archer is challenging for the world title one week, and then he's not on the show the next week. And Brian Cage is on every other week, and Ricky Starks has one match a month on Dynamite. And like again, I like all the talent. It's not a knock on the talents, but I do think that there should be a little more like conservatism when it comes to bringing in talent without having any real plans for them yet. And, we see it. I think we see it a lot in WWE and NXT. They just sign in a bunch of talent, and then you don't see them for 6 months because they haven't figured out what to do with them, and they can't get them on the show. I think AEW has kind of a smaller problem where I think that they are bringing in a lot of talent, and it's good for the talent, but it is, I think, a flaw. And I think I don't say like it's killed anyone yet. But I do think that it's almost confusing to the viewer to be like, if I really was into Will Hobbs, I was like, oh, I'm glad this Will Hobbs guy's getting a push. I'm going to tune in next week because I feel like I'm really enjoying his work so far. And then you tune in next week and he's not even mentioned. And that's just an example of what I think a lot of guys on the roster and women too. I mean, was it? I don't want to get it wrong, but it was like Nyla Rose and Vicky Guerrero. Like they brought in Vicky Guerrero to be the manager of Nyla Rose, and then like it was like months before they had like a match on Dynamite.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, like so, and that was one of those things that's like if you captured the attention of someone being like, oh, Vicky Guerrero is going to be managing Nyla Rose, like I'm going to tune in next week. I bet you they're going to be on because they did it last week, and then they're the rotation is that they're not going to be on until a month from now or whenever. I just do think that is something that I would say if I were to pick one thing that I think AEW could easily improve upon, I think it would be, better utilization of the talents. And hey, you can have a system where, you're when outside of your core talent, if you're just kind of pushing different mid-card talents, just we're going to have these guys on and they're going to be featured prominently for 3 months or 2 months or whatever. And these people are going to be, they're going to have time off. Maybe, they can let their bodies heal and whatever, and they can work on something, come up with a new character, come up with vignette something. And then in 2 months, we'll kind of take some of the other people off and we'll put the new people on and kind of shift it around. I just think they have too big of a roster is basically what I'm saying. And I think that they can utilize it better than they have.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That idea of, pushing a couple talents for a couple months and them taking time off. I mean, that's an idea that's put out for WWE for an off-season system. Like it's not an official off-season, but it's sort of an unofficial one for a lot of the talent. I mean, I kind of brought it up before. Like, look at Sonny Kiss. I don't know if it's gonna kill his run, but like it doesn't really look good if you come in and I don't know if those planned.
Yeah, I think he's fine. Way. He's fine. I don't have a problem with Sonny Kiss. I think I think there are people in the company that are like long-term and short-term kind of planning. I think Sonny Kiss, if you look at the experience level that he has, you look at how he's been positioned so far, him getting squashed, I don't think, if they're going to push Sonny Kiss as a star in 2 or 3 years, which I think is when you would probably end up pushing him, if he gets there, like I don't think anyone's gonna like, hey, he was squashed by Kenny Omega. Hey, if Sonny Kiss turns into a big star in 2 years, they can show like how 2 years ago Kenny Omega ruthlessly killed him and he wants his revenge. Like you can
there
do
you
that
go.
kind of stuff like that. It's the same thing with like Wardlow beat Jungle Boy, and it's like, okay, like should Jungle Boy really be losing? Like he loses a lot, and it's like, you know what? He's 23 years old. You know, they're not going to push him if they're not don't want to push him in the main event right now. It's okay for him to lose because there's understanding that they're a young wrestler. But
I guess
your general point, I agree. I do agree that with what you're saying in general.
yeah, but I guess you also brought up Sean Spears as well. You know, a lot of people have fantasy booked him as part of the Four Horsemen, this new Four Horsemen type with FTR.
Might
but
exist, or might not.
Yeah, but then like it obviously makes sense since he's managed by Tully Blanchard. But even then, they put him with Tully Blanchard, and was his big highlight, Double or Nothing. Like his pants go down.
Yeah,
like that's his biggest highlight so far. And I think he's talked about it before. Like he enjoyed it, he had fun, but like, what does that do for you? Especially how old he is. I think he's early 30s. I think like his age, I believe.
I think he's like the same age as Cody. So I think he's like 35 or 36.
Oh wow, okay, there you go. I mean, even then, like if he's part of this new faction, like okay, what does he do in the faction? Is he just the enhancement guy who takes the pins for everyone else?
Yeah. The Yoshihashi of the new Four Horsemen.
Yeah, because even then, like oh, it's cool to have this new faction because FTR is in it, potentially Cody could be in it, or whoever you want that as that Ric Flair type of guy. But still, it's like if he's in this faction, is just being in the faction that's good for him, because other than that, I don't really see anything else for him. You know, he appears from time to time. He was before the SCU tag match. He's like, oh, good luck, and then it's like, oh, okay, like what was that about? Like,
yeah, there was a lot of that stuff. Like was there a tag team match? Like I think it was tag team match, was it? I think, or maybe it was a singles match. I can't remember, but they just like showed Frankie Kazarian was just like sitting by himself in the stands. I can't remember exactly what it was. And they're like, oh look, it's
so random.
It's Kazarian's like, okay, what's he doing out there? Like, and I get like you.
I mean, it makes sense if you do that with like Darby. You know, he's on commentary for the TNT title match. That makes sense. He's coming up for the TNT title match. But like Kazarian, it's like, are you facing these people?
It's kind of weird stuff. And maybe it's designed to be like that. Maybe it is designed to get people to think. I don't think that's like the worst thing in the world. But I do think you got a point about, you know, like how you know, okay, he's gonna be the Four Horsemen. Like, what's his role? I think Sean Spears. I think if you create the Four Horsemen and then it's FTR and say it's Cody is like the Ric Flair, and then you have like, and then it's Sean Spears, and it's like, okay, that's kind of a notable drop off because. Not because Sean Spears is untalented, but because how he has been used. And that's how I think it would go. I think we can't not talk about the women's division.
Yeah.
I would say that is probably the most frequent. It's I don't know, it's probably not the most frequent criticism of AEW. The most frequent criticism of AEW is definitely like the guys do too many flips in Cornette related spiel, but the most like frequent, I think, like legitimate criticism is that AEW's women's division is very far behind WWE's women's division. I think it's significantly behind Impact's women's division. And I think that there's reasons for that are out of AEW's control, but there also are ways for the company to improve. Jason, you're a big fan of women's wrestling. What is your kind of take on the women's division in AEW right now?
Yeah, I do agree that like they are far behind from WWE, especially NXT in their competition. But like that's just, again, like you said, it's out of AEW's control. Like WWE had the whole women's revolution like years ago, and they've built off that. And the obviously the Four Horsewomen, Charlotte, Sasha, they start off in NXT and they've grown to be these big stars. And AEW, we're doing a 1 year retrospective. Just put in perspective, it's only been 1 year for them. And I guess you also have to look at it too. Like there's not really many veterans in the women's indie scene. If there are, they're signed by WWE right away.
Yeah.
So like there's a lot of young talent and a lot of inexperienced talent as well. Inexperienced in terms of TV. Like some of them like have wrestled a long time in the indies, but again, like the indies and TV, that's really different. And it's kind of interesting. Like you look back on like the first Double or Nothing. Like they had Mercedes Martinez, Jordan Grace on those shows, and they weren't able to sign them. Mercedes Martinez obviously goes to WWE, and Jordan Grace is now with Impact. And so I don't know the details of those negotiations, whether they were actually offer something, or whether WWE offer Mercedes Martinez a little bit more financial security, because I know that's something big for her because she was on the Indies for a very long time.
Yeah.
I'm sure she just wants guaranteed money, and so I don't know what the details of those are. But again, yeah, it's outside of control to get experience because to get experience you have to actually do it. But still, like at least have more than one women's match, Dynamite. Like it's always this one obligatory women's match, and then it's usually just a random match here and there. Sometimes the title gets defended on Dynamite, and I guess with characters as well, it kind of goes back to what we're talking about with talent developing their own storylines. It seems like Britt Baker and Big Swole are the only ones that have any creative ideas, more or less. At least more substantial ones that get used on television. Like Britt Baker is obviously the most developed character, the whole role model
by
stuff.
Far.
And
it's not even close.
Yeah. I can see her winning the title and then doing a bunch of creative stuff there. And, that's what they're building up to, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, Baker is a win for AEW as far as how what they've been able to do with her, which is good because she was one of their first kind of core signings. I think you raised a point about the talent pool is just smaller for women. That's just what it is. And WWE has been very aggressive in signing women. Any woman that's available, they want because they've expanded a lot in how they've used women. And WWE desperately also needs a lot of the experienced women. So someone like Mercedes Martinez has a lot of value to them, even if they already have a lot of women on their roster, because they can stick her in NXT and say, they don't have NXT house shows anymore, but when they did, they can put her and say, look, we got we want you to work with, Xia Li or Aaliyah or some of these people who are less experienced because we need, they're going to get better working with you. And so, and a problem for AEW is that there wasn't like 30 women on the indie scene who they could easily bring in who were experienced and would be really good. And I've said this before when arguing with people about the women's division. There was no women's Chris Jericho that was available. There was no women version of the Young Bucks. There was no women version of Cody Rhodes. If there were, AEW would try to sign them. But there was very few women who had, I would consider like a real star power level on the independents. And at that point, you're competing with WWE, who are making very competitive offers. You're competing with Impact, who can offer different things, an easier schedule. Now they can offer, you can win the men's title if you want. There's just different situation. And so I think AEW deserves some slack as far as they've been trying to bring in talent. I mean, they've brought in a lot of Joshi talent because they're experienced talents, but there's a limit to that. There's the language barrier. There's obviously with the pandemic, you haven't been able to bring any of them in. The only reason Sheeta is still around is because she moved to America before the pandemic hit. Yeah. European talent like Shayna and B. Priestley was supposed to be part of this promotion. She probably would be. She's still here. What was her name?
Sadie Gibbs.
Yeah, Sadie Gibbs to me is more of a project, as far as someone they wanted to bring in to work on for a while. I didn't expect. I can't remember her name there. B. Priestley's tag team partner, is it Jamie Webster? Jimmy Hayter. Yeah, another more experienced talent that from overseas that they bring in. All those people are gone. On top of that, you lost Britt Baker to injury. I mean, she was still prominently featured, but she couldn't wrestle, which was a huge blow because you're already dealing with the women's division, being thinned out due to the pandemic. And didn't someone else
get lost? Chris Statlander.
Yeah, Statlander, who I think was showing a lot of promise and was one of the women on the indie scene who was making a name for herself and was being brought in. She got injured too, so I think that's just bad luck. You can't do anything about the pandemic. You can't do anything about these injuries. What I think AEW needs to improve upon when it comes to the women's division is exactly what you said: is character and storylines. I don't think there's anything wrong. Get these people going in vignettes and promos. Give them a little bit of storyline, even if it's just a small 2 or 3 week feud. Make people feel invested in these things. The Britt Baker versus Big Swole match from All Out, the cinematic kind of dentist office match, I know that wasn't a good match, and a lot of people thought it was dumb and shouldn't have been on the pay-per-view. But all of that considered, I don't even care about the match. That was a successful angle because week after week we saw two women work a storyline, and got their personalities over. Both of them have charisma. So yes, the match was kind of bad, but I think that doesn't matter. We just get these women's personalities over, and there's a lot of women on the roster that they are need to get up and going. And I understand. I don't have. And the other thing with AEW, that, and maybe this goes back to getting the storylines and making people feel invested in it, is that there's an element that AEW is in a wrestling war right now. Got another promotion that's running wrestling at the exact same time as them. You're a company that was up until recently still in year one, still trying to prove that you're a viable product. You really have to make, you need to keep your television viewership at a certain level. The data, you can look at the quarter-hour data, shows that a lot of these women's matches, lose viewers, and the viewers go to NXT. And so I understand you have to be reluctant to say, like, we can't have 4 women's matches on the show because those consistently lose viewers.
Sure.
So I understand that thinking of it. But the flip side of that is that you do have to, like, if you were to invest more time in storylines and characters for the women wrestlers, that wouldn't be the case if you do it right and you push the right talents. Like, if you push talent that, if you get people to invest in a feud, or you can get people to invest in a character and a storyline, they're probably not going to tune out as likely as if you just be like, yeah, here's like Nyla Rose is going to wrestle like Red Velvet or some random person, like, and it's going to be 2 minutes long, and we have to do it. So I do think that is something that the company needs to improve on. It's tough for the women to improve if they're not wrestling regularly, which, they're not doing house shows. And I know they wrestle on Dark, but a lot of these women should probably be wrestling 2 or 3 times a week.
Well, I also think that, I think everyone's talking about the New Japan partnership with AEW, but I think a Bushi Road partnership, and this was brought up before by people who, invest in Stardom, like a Bushi Road partnership would get you involved with Stardom, and then, that would allow you a talent exchange, and, your women to work in Japan, get that experience there, and have more time wrestling, and you can even use Stardom's talent. They have a lot of charismatic wrestlers. Again, I don't know about the language barrier and all that, but still, you have quality wrestling at least to start off with.
Get those reps in
with that. Yeah,
I think AEW. It's been, I don't know how serious or how likely it could actually happen, but I think that an AEW partnership with Ring of Honor would actually be very beneficial for both parties. And the reason the reason I say that is that Ring of Honor needs star power. And AEW needs places for some of these people to work. And I think it's better. And I know that some AEW talent does work on, like, independents, but I think it would be better for them to work in Ring of Honor, which is a more stable organization. An organization that, despite, a lot of criticisms about Ring of Honor, has handled the COVID situation, I think, very well. I think look at Ring of Honor's women's division, which has struggled for a lot of the same reasons as the AEW women's division, is that they haven't invested a lot of time in it, and there's just not a lot of talent out there for them to put forward for a product that outside of the women's division is held to an extremely high in-ring standard. Like, would it be the worst thing in the world for, like, someone like Big Swole or Nyla Rose or the Dark Order? I can't remember her name. Anna Jay, yeah, I can't believe I forgot about it. I want to just call her 99. I can remember 99 being her name in the Dark Order number, but I can't remember her actual name. Anna Jay, like one of those talents, to go and, go to Ring of Honor and wrestle. I don't know who's the women's champion in Ring of Honor right now. I think it's is it still the Man-Eater, Maria Manic?
Manic?
Yeah, I think she's still the women's champion there. Anyway, like to wrestle, just like go there and like have like wrestle like on Ring of Honor house shows and stuff like that. Obviously, that's post-pandemic anything, but I do think that there's some benefit to kind of exchanging talent there. Obviously, going to Stardom would be ideal because you're wrestling real tours and you're wrestling a lot of different matches and it's held to a higher standard. And I just think that is going to be a problem for Ring of Honor, especially when a problem for AEW. Not solely in the women's division. I think you can look at some of their male talent. I think you can look at, people like Will Hobbs, people like Sonny Kiss, people like, even someone like Jungle Boy. Or, obviously I think Jungle Boy's already pretty good, but get them working more, And I know they do that on Dynamite, and they have a lot of people that they are high on, but I do think that there is room for growth there as far as different talents. I mean, what if I don't we don't see Wardlow wrestle that much? Like, what if Wardlow was just in Ring of Honor for 3 months and he was wrestling Jay Lethal and he was wrestling Marty Scurll and he was wrestling I don't know if we'll see Marty Scurll again, but he's wrestling Kenny King. He's wrestling Kenny King. He's wrestling Matt Taven. Like that would probably be really good for Wardlow. I mean, he's a guy with a lot of potential, and I think that that's something that could benefit him without doing that. But I haven't heard anything about that. I don't know if they're gonna form. Like I said, that's just me speculating that it could benefit some.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I sort of cringed about the Ring of Honor thing is because, they don't have star power because their stars left Ring of Honor, and I don't know if there's any beef that's still left there. I don't know if anyone Ring of Honor management is still bitter about the Bucks leaving and Cody.
All right, we did experience some technical difficulties right there, but Jason, we were just talking about some working relationships with AEW. I brought up Ring of Honor. It just is a potential idea of how it could benefit both groups. So, what are your thoughts on
that? Yeah, just sort of talking about how Ring of Honor lost their star power because the Elite left, and so again, I don't know whether management still has any heat with the Bucks or anything like that, or the Cody. Obviously, Impact, Don Callis and Chris Jericho being buddies.
Yep, that's another option. Yeah,
potential partnership. But yeah, AEW, they don't have to do a partnership with anybody. It's not they're doing just fine without them. But it just be something to look at. I'm sure they are definitely look at it, and they're always asked these questions. But it's potentially something to look at in the future. That's just really it so far in partnerships. So there's really nothing else much to say because it's always a speculation and just fan theories and fantasy bookings. But we haven't really heard anything substantive just yet.
Is there anything in AEW that you feel like has been a big surprise compared to what we talked about again at the beginning of the show, like what their original expectations were, how the kind of promotion has developed like that? Is there anything like that you see now? They're like, I'm very surprised that this is happening, whether it's positive or negative.
To be honest, I was not expecting them to build up stars like Sammy Guevara, Darby Allin, or Orange Cassidy this quickly. At least I kind of figured it would take them a couple, like half a year or even a full year to actually develop these kind of very unknown stars. They're very known in the indie scene. Like if you watched a bunch of indies, you knew who Orange Cassidy was, or if you watched Chara, you knew who Orange Cassidy was, or anything like that.
Yeah.
So sort of like me, I was paying attention on the indie scene. He was all in the big indies, and so he was a big name coming up, but I wasn't really expecting AEW to really grasp onto that and to really make him a star, and I wasn't really expecting those kind of guys to become stars. I figured, obviously Chris Jericho, Cody, these guys are established guys, Young Bucks, they've established themselves, and so they're already stars, and so their stars shone even brighter. But I didn't really expect these other guys to really step in and to really be big players in AEW. I don't know, was there anything more surprising for you?
Yeah, no, that's basically where I'm at too, is that I figured that the Young Bucks would do well, I figured that Cody would do well, I figured that Jericho would do well. The company has been much better at getting over talent than I originally thought, especially talent, like you mentioned Orange Cassidy, other like Darby Allin, Ricky Starks, Archer, Cage, people who maybe didn't have quite the same amount of star power as the Young Bucks did, but they brought those guys in, and they have done such a good job with introducing them to the live crowd and introducing them to the viewers at home, giving them an early push. I mean, with both Archer and Cage, I mean, there became this problem where they were almost too successful in pushing them. Cage's original push was so good that people were like, well, you can't beat him. He feels so hot right now. And then they took criticisms oh, yeah, they beat him. Now that was too soon to beat him. And it's you know what? They shouldn't be penalized for being efficient with their time and being good at, pushing a new talent. And I've been very surprised that cohesively the promotion has been very good at pushing talent and protecting talent and allowing talent to be true to their character. And I think that's a big contrast a lot of times in WWE. I think, here's an example from just this week is that, I thought WWE did a bad job with Matt Riddle on Monday Night Raw when he's wrestling AJ Styles, and AJ Styles has Big Jordan on the outside of the ring. And Jordan is like scares Matt Riddle. He makes a fist, and Matt Riddle like reacts and recoils in horror because this guy's so big, and he runs away from him like a coward. And it's like Matt Riddle's character is kind of like he's supposed to be like this badass MMA fighter, and like he shouldn't be afraid of some guy just because he's big. And on the flip side, you had in WWE in AEW, you had Wardlow and Jungle Boy, and Jungle Boy wasn't afraid of Wardlow. He was going right at him. And even though he lost, I felt like he was still protected in the sense that, you know what, he was fearless, and he was that's the kind of baby face that people want to get behind, not the coward who runs away. And that's just, I think, a stark difference between the two companies. And I think that has given AEW just a general edge in storytelling. And we talked about this last week. WWE is so experienced at this, and they've been around for so long, and they have people, not just Vince, but people like Bruce Pritchard and Heyman in the past. But, you know, they have these people who have, you know, Triple H, obviously, Road Dogg, you know, these key people backstage that have been around the business forever. It shouldn't be this big of a problem. And it is. I know it's, you know, we kind of talked a lot about that in our first episode, but that is what has stood out to me about AEW is I think they've been better at getting talent over quickly than I originally would have expected them to be, given their relative lack of inexperience outside of booking for themselves. And obviously Tony Khan had no booking experience before he did this, which I think is another interesting surprise, is that I didn't think Tony Khan, like I didn't know much about Tony Khan. I just knew that he was, you know, his family was really rich, and that he was a passionate wrestling fan. I didn't know he was going to be the booker. I didn't know he was going to, you know, okay, yes or no every angle. I didn't know he was going to, you know, be as hands-on as he has ended up being so. And for someone that had no experience booking professional wrestling, and no real experience within the industry outside of being a big fan, I think it's been very impressive how they've been able to do things.
Yeah, I'm a Fulham supporter, and so obviously the Khans own the Fulham. I've been a Fulham supporter even before the Khans owned the family, so I've had a familiarity with that family, just being, you know, a fan of that soccer team.
Yeah.
And so, but even then, like I wasn't like that's just a different thing, soccer and, you know, the Jaguars and wrestling. I wasn't really expecting that either, like how successful this would be, because I don't like, oh, okay, Tony Khan's doing this other thing, just like hopefully he doesn't mess with, you know, my team, which done their story there, but still, like, you're right. He's been hands-on, and he's been very friendly with the media, I would say. You know, he doesn't really snap back at reporters that often. He's, you know, very enthusiastic in his answers. You know, he's obviously, you know, still a businessman, and still, you know, especially with that Matt Hardy thing, he's very defensive about that. But still, for the most part, he's handled media very well for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's a contrast when you look at like Vince and Triple H on these media calls, where Vince and Triple H come from an isolated environment. I mean, you can read and listen to all these things about Vince. Like, Vince is like, he knows, he lives in the world of pro wrestling. It's his world. It's where he's in control. He doesn't like when things interfere from the real world. And when he talks to investors and when he talks to media calls, I think it's very apparent in Triple H's media calls that Triple H just wants to hear like questions about, like, you know, how great is Johnny Gargano? You know, he doesn't want the question.
NXT?
Yeah, he doesn't want, you know, he doesn't want the question like, hey, how come you guys haven't talked to the Velveteen Dream accuser? Like, how come that wasn't part of the investigation? Like, and I think Tony Khan, and this isn't like Tony, like me, like necessarily singing his praises, but I think coming from a background that was not pro wrestling, coming from a background of professional sports, and I know he also runs like an analytics company, but coming from like a real non-wrestling background, he handles the press in a way that most business CEOs do. I mean, Harold May, from the, you know, still technically the president of New Japan. He's I think he's stepping down at the end of the month, but it was the same way. He came out from wrestling, and he's not going to just answer these wrestling questions. He's going to, you know, answer them in the way that you would if you're a real, you know, I don't want to say that wrestling media is not real journalists, but if you listen to some of the media calls, especially the NXT calls, sometimes the questions that are asked are like, okay, like no one cares. Like that's not like a real question you would ask. This is your one time to ask Triple H a question, and that's what you ask. But I don't, not naming names or anything. But if you listen to the questions, you know, like they're not. They're a lot of them. They're bordering on kayfabe questions, but. I think that is a big difference in the companies, and I've been impressed with Tony Khan. I mean, he's not perfect, but I think I saw someone. It was after a very good AEW show, and I saw a comment saying like, "We finally found the answer that like someone from the Wrestling Observer newsletter message board, if they could they book better than Vince McMahon if they had the same resources." And we got that answer because I guess Tony Khan was a member of the board. I'm not a member of those boards, so I don't know the answer.
No, I don't either.
but the idea is the same, is that he's just basically was just like a big hardcore fan that also happened to have the means to start his own wrestling promotion. And I think kind of wrapping things up, I think I'm very happy that I think while it maybe hasn't provided the alternative that every wrestling fan is seeking and lived up to that ideal, I think that the industry is much, much better right now because of its existence. It's already been very beneficial to the talent. Obviously, it's given them a lot more leverage. It's made everyone a lot more money. Even if the company goes belly up tomorrow, it's made the wrestlers a lot wealthier. And I think it's given a platform to talent that, probably wasn't ever going to get a push on, on national television. I don't think Eddie Kingston would be main eventing a pay-per-view in WWE this year, but he is in AEW, and I think that's very valuable, and I think it's good that the organization is around.
Yeah, obviously competition is always great, and there's a real competition, especially, Impact, obviously, try to go Monday nights, and that was always going to be unsuccessful for them. But, AEW, they're on TNT, and they're generating, from what we understand, decent amount of profit from running these shows.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't gotten really into the business aspects of this, but there's no way to look at AEW right now and think it's not been a successful business at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, within the TV industry, the belief was that they would get about 500,000 viewers when they debuted. Okay, so even though if they're not hitting whatever barometer people choose to define success as, a million people a week or whatever, or whatever the key demo is, they're delivering above the industry expectations. And the company had originally had, I want to say it was a 3 or 4 year TV deal with TNT. And after, I think, 4 or 5 months, they ripped up that deal and gave them a newer, longer, more lucrative deal. Which to me is all the evidence you need to show that the company has proven to be a business success. That it, that the TV industry was like, oh, we got to get these guys to a bigger contract because they've outperformed so well, and that there's a lot of financial security there beyond the fact that obviously there's a lot of money backing it, given the Khan family's personal wealth. And I don't know, I think people don't understand how unusual it is that a company has basically sprung up overnight and is delivering solid television ratings. And is doing a lot of pay-per-view buys. Their attendance was very strong until the pandemic. I mean, the real thing for me, AEW business-wise, was literally when the pandemic hit, it felt like they were beginning to peak. They had done a really good number on television the week before. They had the Blood and Guts, aka War Games match set up that was going to happen, in Newark, New Jersey. They were going to have their biggest, I think it might have been their biggest crowd ever. It was the I'm trying to think.
Close to it.
Yeah, it was like 13,000 tickets sold. They were going to have a huge crowd. I have a feeling they would probably have broken 1 million viewers, and I feel like they had the rug completely pulled out from under them, but due to the pandemic. And I think that has hurt them, from a growth standpoint. I don't know if you're going to be growing fans. I mean, I've been impressed that enough fans have stuck around for given what we have as a wrestling product. I think now at this point people have adjusted to what they expect wrestling without fans or with limited fans is going to be. But it was really hard at first to sell empty arena wrestling on people, and I hope it did, but it does feel like that they did have the rug pulled out for them a little bit from a business perspective due to the pandemic, because they were really probably going to have their biggest Dynamite in history outside of the debut. On that show in March that unfortunately was the first big show canceled, and every other taping since has been canceled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which kind of makes it interesting for this potential second show, because Like,
Mm-hmm.
where do you put it? Like, you don't put it on Thursday because Thursday Night Football, and Fridays at SmackDown. I don't know if they want to do another war against another thing, and then maybe Tuesdays, I guess. I don't know if you want to be of Impact, and that's really competition or anything. Maybe they bring back like a Saturday night main event type show. But then I don't know what that looks like now. Like, running shows on Saturdays, is that the same as in the 80s? Probably not. But like, I
Yeah.
don't know how viable that can be if you're doing another Saturday night main event type show. Like, I don't know whether that's successful or not.
Yeah, I mean, the second show is definitely a key aspect of what I think their year two is going to be like. And my questions are like, what's it going to be like? Is it going to be like, is it going to be equal to Dynamite? I would say that's probably not a good idea, just from like the idea of splitting. Dynamite's supposed to be, it helps to have the A show. And I guess it's going to be, my guess is going to be like dark, but there's going to be a little bit more star power on it. But but you asked like, when is it going to air? Like, what is a good night of the week for it to air? I think Cody said, I think recently, that it's going to air on a Warner Media station, which means that it might not air on TNT. It might air on a smaller network.
HBO Max, like their streaming service.
I think about this a lot, Jason. That young people are not flipping the channels anymore.
No, they're not.
And that you are better off, if you want to reach real teenagers, you want to create new fans from scratch, you're better off having like a hit Netflix show or a hit show on a streaming service than you are, having a hit show on TBS or anything like that. Like, I think, or you're better off having a hit show on YouTube. So I do think that there is some value in just like putting it on HBO Max and getting people like, oh, there's wrestling? Like, I don't know, I'm bored. Let me put this on in the background or something like that. I think that is a way to introduce it to new fans. I mean, obviously you could just put all episodes of Dynamite on HBO Max. They might already be on them. I don't even know that. But that
I don't know either.
Yeah, I don't have HBO Max.
Yeah, but then I guess that goes into like, sort of obviously a streaming service, but then like I don't know how, like, I know Lucha Underground used to be on Netflix, like, and Netflix has really released their numbers, so I don't know how well, like, how many people were actually watching Lucha Underground on Netflix, and so I guess that's kind of a question they'll probably ask themselves as well, like, okay, like, wrestling is kind of on streaming services, like, but it's mostly like on demand type things, not like live or like newer content, and so I don't know how much people are actually watching those, because these companies